All right, well, welcome everyone to today's webinar on growth challenges and opportunities OEM face in the digital age with Alex Glaser. So first of all, I would like to thank Alex for his time today and preparing slides and sharing his expertise with the attendees in today's webinar. Alex, thanks for coming. Thanks for being here. Alex is the Vice President of Harbor Research, which is really focused on developing new growth opportunities in the markets of smart systems, technology, and the Internet of Things. So thanks, Alex, for taking the time to prepare, as well as taking an hour out of your day to share your thoughts and insights with everyone. Before I end it off over to Alex, I will just take the opportunity to give a quick introduction of interfacing for those of you that might not know about us. Interfacing is hosting the event today, and we are a global software and service provider with over 25 years of experience in process-based solution. We started off as a process modeling and simulation engine in the early 90s with an add-on into Visio. And from the late 90s through to today, we have been focusing on our key flagship product called the Enterprise Process Center, or the EPC, which has been recognized for many years as a leader by Gartner in multiple quadrants, including Enterprise Business Process Analysis, the EBPA, Business Operating Systems, Operational Intelligence, and now a new one in 2018, Digital Twin, which are really aligned with today's topic. Our solution has modules based on different drivers, whether it coming from a GRC perspective, continuous improvement, automation, system integration, or process standardization. Our platform helps convert paper-based tasks into digital forms with the capabilities to do monitoring and performance analysis. So really the product is a full suite. We have also been recognized as a leader in knowledge management, which is another hot topic right now. Our central repository-based solution is praised by many, and our platform allows you to standardize now not only your processes, but also your documents, your risks, your KPIs, objectives, roles, responsibilities, and so on and so forth. And just to give you a quick snapshot of the Enterprise Process Center, it's different modules and its purposes. Our platform has evolved over the years. We are currently on version 11. Version 10 was really the next generation of our platform. And we recognize as a company that product development is a key priority for us. Version 10, our latest technology, is mobile, cloud-based, and really an enterprise-based solution that can be leveraged for a single user or 100,000 users. So the concept of our solution is really providing one central repository for standardizing all your information for collaboration, for training, continuous improvement, change management, for leveraging the platform for blueprinting of your future state, or for clarifying your processes to clarify the business rules at every step. You can also help build new requirements when you get into digitization. And ultimately, it means being able to map your customer's journey through every touch point across different business lines. Being able to map all the way down to the technical side, if you want to go down to the metadata of your system, you can do it. And then provide operational support for your operation. And of course, you can also input controls against ongoing governance, but also putting the central controls of who can change what, when, and why. And also all the audit trails that come with that and control the risk. One of the unique features of our platform is that it is agile, and our solution can interconnect and integrate with other web services, APIs, which is necessary in this era of smart systems. From our end, we see interconnection as a powerful way to leverage your business model. And we see our solution as the back office, essentially, of those systems that can trigger tasks, then automate everything that goes around your business and connect it to different products and actually collect data, leveraging the data and everything that has to do. And how we do that is with rapid application development. And that's how we actually automate the processes. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand it over to Alex. And Alex, thanks for coming today. And for all of you out there, if you're looking into OEMs and smart systems, or if you're looking for digital transformation strategy, his company Harbor Research could really help you with that.
Great. Thank you, Tony. And thanks, everyone, for joining today. What we're going to do is we're going to talk today about growth challenges and opportunities that OEMs face in the digital age. Before I jump in, I want to just give you a brief background to Harbor Research. So we're a research and consulting firm. So we work with both OEMs who are building equipment and technology suppliers or vendors who are developing technologies that are then adopted into these technologies and these equipment types. So we conduct research and analysis, but we also do a lot of business model design, growth opportunity assessments, and then services design as well. So to talk a little bit about the challenges, I want to set the stage. So what we did is we actually interviewed 55 different OEMs in the marketplace, and we were trying to ask them about what were the successes and what were the failures that they had seen as it relates to adopting digital transformation or digital technologies. So anything from test and measurement equipment, so players like Fluke and Fortive, but also diversified equipment manufacturers like ABB and Honeywell and Siemens and so on. And so what we were really trying to do is first understand what were their challenges. So things like leadership doesn't understand where to begin, or we can't all agree what IoT means for our company, to, oh, well, one unit's taking a technology first approach and they're not talking to customers, to other types of challenges, like, we can't figure out how to drive interoperability within our systems with our peers or potential other providers in these environments. So as we talk to these players, one of the things that was very obvious to us is that, many challenges point to the fact that we're very early on in this kind of opportunity or this evolution. So before we get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of what we describe for digital and smart systems. And so for digital transformation to really take off, we need radical new thinking about information technologies, but also operational technologies, and how new concepts and new machines will be kind of adopted over time to create new data systems that organizations will need to leverage. There's a set of questions that we must ask ourselves in this opportunity. So first, as I was talking about, how should we define and frame smart systems and IoT? Where should we start on this journey? What process and decision framework should we utilize? And then how should we think about a technology and business architecture that will align? A lot of what Tony was talking about was the sort of business technology, IT. And what we really need to understand is will all those IT systems actually align with the operational systems that are in the field today? So how should we think about organizing the people and relationships that will inform those opportunities? And then lastly, what do success factors equal to the company? So how should an OEM think about digital, and what, is it ROI? Is it customer growth? How do we actually determine what those success factors are? So let's start with defining smart systems. The reason we call it smart systems is because we believe it's no longer about just connecting things to the internet. This is actually about data and information architectures. This is about new systems. So whether you think about artificial intelligence driving new insights, or you think about blockchain technologies providing a distributed ledger to exchange data in ways we haven't seen, one thing is for certain, there are three kind of main areas that are kind of driving new innovations that are allowing for us to kind of get to this next phase of smart systems. So start with sensors and actuators. So the cost of sensing is going down, and as a result, you're seeing digitization of physical environments in ways you hadn't seen before. So whether it's acoustic and sound, or chemical and gas, leak detection, flow, all of these different sensing capabilities are now digitizing what was once non-digitized in the physical world. The next is connectivity. So a lot of hype in the market today about 5G, but that's not here yet. So what networks are we using? So private LTE, for example, with CBRS and multi-fire, or Wi-Fi technologies, or lower end cellular technologies like 2G and 3G, or 4G and LTE, plus all of your personal area networks. So Bluetooth low energy, all of these networks, Ethernet in the wired space, all of these networks are aimed at one thing: trying to take what was connected through traditional networking and putting it onto the internet or some form of network that will allow for me to create near real-time communication in that environment. And as the cost of sensing has gone down, so has the cost of connectivity, meaning I can connect more devices with lower costs. But the other thing to point out is that the wireless technologies being used today are much more reliable and have higher performance than they ever have in the past. The third, which is probably the most important piece, is the evolution of applications and analytics and artificial intelligence and those sorts of terms being thrown out. But let's just be real. This is about business applications to improve operations within environments. So whether that's control and automation, remote monitoring, predictive maintenance through analytics, customer support, upgrades and over-the-air updates, all of these applications are starting to come to the surface as a result of the fact that I'm now able to sense new things, connect them in ways I couldn't before. So I'm gaining access to data that I hadn't seen before at a rate that I hadn't seen before. And so now I'm starting to be able to use tools to create insights to drive new value. So let's talk a little bit about some of the pain points, barriers, and drivers that we saw when we were talking to OEMs. So to start with pain points, one of the main drivers for digital transformation or IoT and smart systems is the unplanned equipment downtime. It's very costly to companies and to organizations. And so when you think about whether it's in a mine or an airport or a building, unplanned downtime is the biggest factor for why companies want to make investment. A pain point is employee skill gaps. So they want to address these problems, but the skills that are there today are much more traditional engineering skills. We need new software development skills, new application development skills. And so we're trying to figure out a way to address that skill gap. Integrating all of these technologies. So whether it's legacy equipment that's been in the field for 15 years, a newer device that's being shipped today, there's a diverse range of networking and software capabilities in the market, and that leads to a very complex challenge of trying to address how to integrate all of these existing and new technologies. And then the third is, or fourth is kind of complex multi-party maintenance. So you have so many different vendors and so many OEMs in these customer environments that it leads to a sort of lack of ownership, but also a very difficult challenge to address. Who do I need to talk to get certain problems or orchestration of service kind of driving? So let's shift to barriers. So when I think about interoperability, or I think about unclear ROI, these are terms that have been thrown out, and people have been talking about them, but how do we actually address them? So when we talk to OEMs and we try and figure out interoperability, we're really stressing the ecosystem of partners that are working together upstream rather than midstream or downstream to really address these problems. When we think about ROI or perceived tech cost, we look at the application revenues over time and the software upfront development versus the application revenues over time. That revenue kind of trumps a lot of these costs upfront. Now, that being said, from a P&L perspective, general managers, their job is to ensure the highest performance in their P&L. And so they're very focused on that. So anything that's going to disrupt that performance is a challenge. And so we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about different organizational structures that people have been leveraging to try and address the pressures that those GMs face. So let's talk a little bit about drivers. So availability of capital is very high. Company behavior. So there are a lot of people today in leadership positions who understand the value of digital and IoT. That's no longer the question or the problem. The question or the problem that comes up is, how am I going to create new partnership networks? How am I going to create new value for my customer and do that in a way that will drive value for my shareholders or the company that I work for? The last driver that I just want to bring up is that these applications are proving uptime. They are proving efficiency and overall equipment effectiveness. And that's what's kind of creating a snowball effect in the market, is that you're seeing use cases come to surface that are legitimate and actually proving value for the parties involved. So when we think about the opportunity, this is just one example of a manufacturing value chain. But the reason we bring this up is that it's very confusing and diverse. So when I think about partnerships that are occurring today, so PTC Rockwell or GE and Microsoft, there's a lot of big players that are partnering as to a face to the customer that would say, oh, that makes sense. They're going to provide more value. But at the end of the day, one of the challenges is, when I get down to brass tacks, how am I actually leveraging these technologies and driving new value like we were just talking about? So, if I start on the left-hand side, it's all of the IoT technology players driving value into automation and control OEMs with partnerships to OEMs or device equipment manufacturers. Once I have the technology embedded into these pieces of equipment, then I have to work with network and application providers to actually connect the device, but then use the data once connected to drive new value for my end customers like Shell and Air Liquide and Dow Chemical. When you think about industrial manufacturing channels, there's a lot of complexity between value-added resellers and distributors. And so, how you leverage your channel to enable these solutions is something that I think is still a challenge that we have yet to address. And along the bottom, you see sort of SIs popping up at different areas along this value chain to try and help drive systems integration and new professional service value. So let's talk a little bit about the technologies that are entering the OEM arena. So we just talked about the players. Now let's talk about the technologies. So the first thing that I want to bring up is distributed systems. So about 5 years ago, when Jim Hebelman released a piece in the Harvard Business Review, the big emphasis was on data lakes. And I think one of the reasons the team had suggested data lakes was this is a way to organize data to create new value and new analytic value. The issue is that kind of defeats the purpose of what smart systems is about, because when I think about distributed data and I think about trying to actually enable a distributed system, the last thing I want to do is create huge amounts of storage costs with cloud storage. And I also don't want to create a lot of latency in my system by having to store all of my data in the cloud, run analytics in the cloud, and then take all of those learnings and push them back through the system. What we'd like to see happen is continue to use the cloud for more powerful analytic and artificial intelligence like rules-based engines. You will always need that, but start to distribute through an extensible solution application architecture some of the information. And so we're seeing players today who are able to do certain parts of the logic on the device or on the gateway rather than doing this all in the cloud. And I think a lot of people understand the concept, but I don't think we're embracing truly distributed systems yet. Think about mobile applications. So we've been having a lot of conversations with companies, and I always pull out my phone and shake it, and I say, this changed everything. And the reason that mobile changed everything is because at the end of the day, if I'm a factory worker, or if I manage a plant, at home, I'm able to order an Uber, and I'm able to use my phone to turn down my air conditioning, and I'm able to do all these things with connected devices via my apps on my phone. Why shouldn't I be able to do that in the factory or within an operating environment? And so people, I think, have come accustomed to mobile applications and applications in general that are sleek, have a very strong presence for the user in mind when they're designed and those sorts of things. And so over time, we think that mobile applications are going to continue to ripple through the operational environment. Next would be analytics. We believe that first, predictive and then prescriptive analytics are sort of the keys when it comes to trying to find efficiencies in operations, reduce unplanned downtime, and really work through how a system should operate efficiently. And so in our opinion, analytics is one of those things that, product analytics has been around for a while, But as we move forward, it's going to be around services analytics and systems analytics that I think moving beyond just a single device, but across systems and analyzing how those applications can improve over time. So to revisit some of the challenges and hurdles that we found when we were talking, it really comes down to three axes. So there's technology, business, and customer. So when I start with technology, it's managing complex data. So one of the things we haven't touched on yet is the fact that in diverse equipment environments, like a port, for example, you have many different types of data being surfaced. So the machine data coming from the forklift is different than from the overhead hoist crane, which is different from the actual crates themselves. And so how am I actually managing the data and being able to put that into an information architecture that allows for analytics? Another piece would be security and data ownership. So, there's been breaches over the last 3 years that really have kind of raised the alert of many operational individuals and professionals to say, well, maybe I don't want to put this on a network if it's going to expose me, et cetera. But at the same time, I think the value outweighs the risk if you're paying attention and you're being proactive in your security approach. So if I move over to the customer side, 2 points to bring up. One is poor user experience. So we're used to DOS and we're used to green screens and we're used to traditional software that you would find for programming a PLC. Those days are moving and over soon, because individuals in these environments want to be able to leverage, the same types of applications that they use in their daily lives. So seeing a new user experience in the way that individuals are able to kind of interact with data, systems, and products will have to change. But today we see a lot of poor UX out there. The other is that it's very fragmented across the customer landscape. So depending on the size of the company, the location of where you are in the world, the types of business that you're in, there's a lot of fragmentation across the customer landscape that OEMs are facing a lot of challenge in dealing with. On the business side, two to call out. One would be developing and finding your place in the ecosystem. So I think this is very important to call out, because one thing that people need to understand is that it doesn't mean that you have to own the end-to-end solution. You definitely have to think about the end-to-end solution and where you kind of live in that story. But if I'm a component manufacturer, as we like to call it, I have to think about how my data relates with the larger systems or equipment types in that ecosystem, and that's okay. The president of Harbor Research, Glenn Olmendinger, has a great story about, two companies coming together and actually overcoming these opportunities and challenges. And the line that came out of it was, we share because we care. And the idea is that we have to be able to, want to actually move forward and drive digital transformation. And that means giving up and participating in ecosystems. And then the last is sort of this alignment of business and technology with support services. So I have to think about, not only my ERP and my CRM system, but I also have to think about my operational systems as well. And how all that correlates with driving customer support, I think, is someplace that we're facing extreme challenge today. So where are we? Well, it's still early in the game. And what we mean by that is that there are still a lot of opportunities that have been sort of untapped. So when we think about simple applications, that's a lot of alerts and alarms, remote monitoring, very basic sort of alerts. And again, if you think about areas like the smart grid or the grid for in general, they've been monitoring substations and power generation plants since the late 80s and early 90s. So monitoring is not new there. I think what's happening, though, is that as more devices come online and more data becomes available, you're moving into compound applications. So whether that's multi-vendor equipment support, that's automated services and systems, more insightful or predictive asset management, these types of compound applications are occurring as a result of the fact that the tools to build applications are becoming easier, the data sources are becoming more varied, and the ability for customers to actually leverage that data in a costly way, that the cost continues to go down. And so over time, we just see more and more value being obtained. And then where we think we're headed and where we see it kind of heading is what you're starting to see in smart cities, where lighting systems are being used as more than just lighting systems. They're starting to be used for public safety. They're starting to be used for traffic, emergency response. transportation infrastructure, however you want to look at it. There are series of kind of compound applications that are coming together around a single set of devices and opportunities. And so the more and more you look at cities, I think they're a test bed for how this will evolve in many of these other traditional environments like water utilities, energy, manufacturing, etc. So let's talk a little bit about the process and decision framework required to actually enable digital transformation. One thing to call out is that this is not a linear process. This is something that is constantly evolving and will continue to evolve as you embrace digital transformation in your business. So, upstream, it's about understanding sort of the use cases and applications that, are available to your company. And so, I think that's probably first step is identifying where can we actually drive value for our customers and talking to customers to actually identify those use cases and applications and potential new solutions. From there, it's really how will we take those use case applications and kind of extend our core offerings and product offerings and value to address those new use cases. So that's sort of the first phase. The second phase then is about thinking through the relationships. So whether that's SIs, whether that's analytics application partners, customer support, whatever that may be, what are those formal and informal relationships that you must kind of think about and how will they exist in the future? From there, it's thinking about, the products and systems that will actually be leveraged. And from there, what we think about is, putting these opportunities into context. And so it's not just about, hey, we found a really good, asset management use case. We're going to use these two partners, but you have to put that into context. How will this actually get developed and deployed? Who owns the responsibility of actually deploying and installing and maintaining those sorts of things? So once we kind of work through that, then we move to the upper part, which is about actually deploying and developing the strategy. So does our go-to-market make sense? Will the system actually be configured correctly? And how will we address kind of systemic or organization like issues or the capabilities of our own organization to address the ongoing sort of requirements in this new opportunity? And so to us, this is a virtuous cycle in the sense that you kind of are constantly working through this with your customer. But the one thing I would say is that the companies who succeed in this process put the customer first. They're not thinking about the internal org first. They're actually working with customers on their own dime to develop these solutions. So here's kind of an example of a digital framework. So of course, up front, I have my strategic assets. So things like my sales force, my brand, my partnership networks, my dealer networks, the actual products, the innovation processes that I have, and the knowledge that I have of my customers and how they use my products. What that does is that really feeds a set of building blocks that break out into three areas. So I have my customer experience. So how will my customer actually interact with data? How will they drive value for themselves as a result of us connecting our machines and driving these new application services? But then thinking about the operational processes in the business model. So, what's the actual worker and process enablement that's going to occur and how will that create process improvement? And then coming back to the business model, which is, as always, what's the monetization scheme? How are we actually going to drive revenue and create new value and actually obtain or realize that value? And what's pointing kind of back at those building blocks is the actual, investment. So whether that's from a skills perspective or from a dollars in an initiative standpoint, we believe that over time, you'll have to kind of see this as a supportive framework, and you can't do one without the other. But all of this is supported by building an kind of an ecosystem of partners to help sustain and maintain those values. So how should we organize to drive digital innovation and impact? So we call this the benzene diagram. And the reason we call it a benzene diagram is that you can't look at any one of these pieces without considering the other. So first, let's start in the upper left. We talked about, kind of customer experience or understanding how intelligence products are used and experienced today. Then we have to think about sort of what we call strange bedfellows. And the example I like to use is, we wake up in the morning as partners and we go to bed as competitors, and we're okay with that quick of a moving environment because of the fact that things are changing so quickly And over time, we have to embrace the concept of strange bedfellows. Non-traditional growth methods. So we need to remove the traditional stage gate processes that kind of trap us in our own thinking and get outside of that to grow beyond the core business to new digital smart systems. We have to innovate quickly. We have to fail fast, as many people say. I mean, this is not a process that's ever been done before for a lot of these companies. So if it's not working, we need to fail and keep moving. We need to look for new sources of differentiation, so novel solutions that are enabled by IoT technologies and ecosystems. And then lastly, we have to think about the business models and the revenue models. And again, the point of this is to say, look, you literally have to factor all of the additional 5 when you're looking at one node on this chart. So what are the critical success factors we should focus on? So we really see 8 success factors. So you have to discover and enable new UX. You have to organize the structure of digital kind of teams and functions in a way that will allow for you to fail fast and move quickly. You have to experiment and kind of step out of your traditional modes of innovation. You have to organize clever combinations of systems and technologies. And then you have to extend skills through relationships, partnerships, ecosystems, and strange bedfellows. Again, strange bedfellows is that idea of partnering with people that it may not feel comfortable at first, or it may feel comfortable at first, but either way, at some point, there's going to be some friction that creates growth. Managing creative contention across organizations. So, obviously different P&Ls pulling for different portions of the budget. How do we actually work with that? What is the functions, roles, and responsibilities, the governance structure, and how that actually moves forward? One thing I would stop and say there is that, without leadership buy-in, it's going to be a big challenge to actually transform the business. When I think about creating new digital ventures, we'll talk a little bit about some of the success factors there, and then lastly, aligning the business and technology architectures. So one thing I just want to bring up is that, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to own the entire end-to-end solution, but you have to think about the entire end-to-end solution. So from the device to the network, and how I enable that device onto a network, and then think about the flow of data, whether it be with gateways or through the cloud and that sort of thing, to all the different applications that I want to deploy, to the actual channel partners and the enablement partners and systems integrators, then to the end customer. And I think this is where if people take one thing from this presentation, you have to put the customer first. What they need and what they're willing to pay for and what they're going to do with the data that you're providing them is paramount to anything that we're going to talk about today. Because once I enable and identify those problems, then I can organize everything else on this screen to meet those problems and drive opportunity. So let's think a little bit about how we should actually think about relationships, or how we should think about organizations. So there's many different types of digital organizations that are popping up. So in some companies, you're seeing across diversified manufacturers that there's sort of a standalone digital business unit. So for example, in GE, they have GE Digital, and it's responsible for working with the different business units to digitize those different BUs and the equipment in those BUs. There's other types as well. So you can be sort of enabled within each BU. So, for example, within Siemens, a lot of their technologies are actually working within the building's technology unit. Now, again, they do have MindSphere, which is sort of a central organizing. But if you look into their individual BUs, they all have their own initiatives around how they're working to drive digital and IoT. For smaller companies, we've seen different approaches. So, for example, there's certain, kind of, I don't know how to describe them, but like filtration or monitoring or certain types of equipment within these different business units. What they're doing is they're actually kind of attaching to leadership and acting as their own sort of functional organization, and then kind of working across the BUs, but they're really as part of the corporate leadership, and they have the CEO's sort of directive to go after it. And again, with all of these different areas, I should mention the third, which is, project-based. So I organize a group or a growth team across the organization to come together for a period of time to develop digital within the organization, but those individuals go back to their BUs once that project is done. All of these different relationship opportunities have value, have threats, have risks, but also have opportunity. And so deciding how your organization thinks about those depends on sort of the dynamics within your culture and your company. Next thing to call out is the fact that solutions today are not new. A lot of the technologies that we're seeing, I mean, there are new technologies like augmented reality. We've seen that for the last 5-6 years. But at the end of the day, when I think about Internet of Things and connecting devices, sensing and connectivity and applications, those have been around for years. And so our message is basically you have a set of solutions, whether it be robotics, whether it be additive manufacturing like 3D printing, decentralized information architectures through different platforms, for example. What we see is the intersection of those technologies with traditional technologies like CAD and PLM and distributed control systems and CNC machines and PLCs, right? So there's sort of this creative combination of existing technology that will drive these solutions. People should think about it that way rather than thinking, oh my gosh, I have to create some net new solution. So, next kind of success factor around the rapid experimentation to develop and deploy. So again, although this appears linear, I will say that the loops are meant to be that you are moving kind of in both across the business tech and the technology architecture. So when I think in the green part and I think about sort of the actual sort of technology architecture, I have to think about scale. I have to think about interoperability. I have to think about user experience and sort of the actual requirements for that. But then I also have to align that with the business and say, so what are the ecosystem? What is the trade-offs? What are the development risks? How should actual data be leveraged? What's the governance and those sorts of things? And so as you kind of move through this process from discovering and defining to developing and deploying solutions, you have to continue to come back and ask yourself, how does the business and technology architecture align? Ecosystems. So when we think about ecosystems, we think much more than just my direct customer or my direct channel partner. The way we kind of look at it is like a platform business model. So in the upper part of your partnership model, it's all about the applications, the networking technologies, the sensing and processing capabilities that you're looking to leverage and the platforms that you're going to use, whether that be for cloud or device management or application development. And then the downstream partnerships. So things like co-innovation with customers, or thinking about your channel partners, or thinking about investment opportunities or research organizations. How do you actually leverage the entire ecosystem to create efficiency to drive these new solutions into market? But I will say that there are a couple of companies in the market when we spoke with them that were really about owning every last piece of this. And they moved much slower than those companies that were reaching out to partners to drive innovation together and to really create new opportunities. And again, it does come back to your organization's culture, but we do stress and believe that those who are succeeding in the market are leveraging partnerships, whether that's through investments, whether that's through mergers, whether that's through kind of these organic partnerships or inorganic partnerships, depending on how you look at it. We really see those ecosystems being a catalyst for growth in this opportunity. Next piece is about the kind of the information architecture, and we touched on this before, but when we think about the information architecture, there is a certain level of scalability, interoperability, and sort of asynchronous processing that occurs that allows for a truly distributed architecture. And so as you see devices working together to create sort of this mesh, as the picture describes, spare computing in tractors versus forklifts versus trucks versus other types of equipment is being used by others in that ecosystem. And so you're able to actually leverage that processing to drive new value, but also create a level of embedded intelligence in the system where it becomes smart. And that's why we call this smart systems, because we believe eventually a lot of the machines will be making the decisions for themselves in the context of the machines around them. And so the level of intelligence will increase to a point where humans are there to guide, humans are there to oversee, but the machines are doing the processing and when to alert and when to make adjustments or request over-the-air updates, etc. So these are 5 growth models that when we think about sort of business models that different companies are kind of embracing. And one thing you will notice here is that there are companies in multiple places here, because different business units or different elements within those businesses are embracing new types or different types of modes. So let's start with designers. So designers sort of start with unique organizational structures to create, extraordinary value. So they're actually going to launch a digital business unit. Bosch Software Innovations, GE Digital, company Diversity in the chemical space did this as well. And their main charter in that organization is to actually drive a new digital opportunity for the company, but as its own standalone business unit, which gives it the most flexibility, but also gives it the highest risk. The constructor is someone who really takes the path of buying platforms or tools to enable these opportunities. So, for example, Acuity Brands has made several acquisitions since 2012, specifically, players like DG Logic and Lucid in the building space to actually build and construct a digital business. And so they have done it that way, whereas the designers were doing it in sort of an organic growth from perspective. The grower is someone who actually kind of spins out or grows businesses organically within their businesses today. So if I look at sort of Rockwell, they didn't launch a separate business unit. They didn't buy a bunch of companies, but they had the skills and they had the capabilities to actually launch the digital factory in a way that it's part of their operations. And so, yes, are they driving partnerships? Absolutely. And that's kind of the main point of the grower. Is that they're using partnerships to enable these opportunities in ways that others are not. The planner is fostering opportunities that mark a big shift from the company's existing businesses. So, for example, Fortive, which was formerly part of Danaher, sort of spun out and took a pivot to become a digital business. And one of the sub companies or child companies in that group is Fluke. And Fluke's done a really nice job of, in the test and measurement space, understanding through Fluke Connect how to drive new value added services for their test and measurement devices. And as Fortive has made this shift to sort of become their own business, they are now have kind of taken the reins off and are really growing at a much faster pace than they might have been if they were sort of under the umbrella of Danaher and that environment. So the last is Operator, which is Danaher is a good example of this Danaher business system, Emerson business system. These are very for lack of a better term, rigid, but very, very business-focused, margin-focused businesses, avoid risk, drive efficiencies, and create new value and new services through those efficiencies. So if it can create more efficiency in the business, then let's do it. If it's going to create risk in my P&L and my general manager is going to freak out because they've got a certain level of responsibility there, then we shy away from it. And so, again, all of these different models and strategies across these OEMs have a reason they exist, is because they're working for those companies that we're looking at in this graphic. But again, if you're stepping into this and you're trying to understand how to address this opportunity, looking at some of these players and looking at some of these approaches could be very helpful. So new growth and innovation modes. So whether it's through M&A, whether it's through collaborative ventures, business ventures, internal R&D, or corporate ventures, depending on the lead time to maturity, so the lead time to actually deploy versus sort of how, is the company looking to just extend its core or actually drive net new businesses? all of these different innovation modes for growth are available. It's just depending on your company and your goals from a digital transformation standpoint. It really depends on, how your team decides to leverage these different kind of modes. Again, just to reiterate that, the architectures must be aligned. So when we think about digital and we think about OT and IT, aligning those operations and information technology and leveraging ecosystems and driving new service innovation, you have to continue to align those architectures. So my last slide, I'll just leave it here, and then we'll move it to questions for the last 5-10 minutes. Is when I think about kind of creating value or capturing value, so how to organize evolving offerings or create value and capture value. So in the first half, I have to think about customer experience. I have to think about customer needs. I have to think about the actual offering. And so, when I think about, the ability to, be able to drive the actual customer facing value, what I have to be able to do is really think through that UX, those needs, and really, kind of understand the offering that's going to meet those needs. Now, when I think about capturing value, it's all of the things we've been talking about. How do I align the organization? How do I analyze data and broker data that's required? How do I manage critical processes that are actually going to create efficiencies in my operations and value for my customers? So with that, I'll hand it back to John, and just want to thank everybody for the time today, and really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. That was really good.
Yeah, thanks, Tony.
There's a couple of things I really connected with during all of this. The value chain, for instance, it was interesting to see the list and GE and Microsoft working together. It's really interesting. They're giants of industry, Fortune 500 companies, but you see them trying to digitize and trying to do new things. And then the whole concept of ecosystems and partnership as a catalyst for growth, that was really interesting. That somehow to compete nowadays, you have to see your competition, you have to understand your competition, but you also have to partner with your competition somehow. And the last thing I really connected with was the barriers to adoptions that you brought up, like the skills and knowledge gap or the low understanding of benefits. It was interesting to me to see that the barriers to adoption that you encounter in technology are similar or very similar to the ones that you will encounter for organizations. But I'll leave it at that, and let's open it up to questions. There's a few that popped up during the webinar. So for one, someone asked, let's see here, what is the first step for an OEM that wants to begin a digital transformation? Is it to set up a team, or does that come later? What's the best practices? So.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it kind of goes back to some of those modes of innovation we were talking about. So I think, obviously, in order for someone to set up a team inside of a business around digital transformation, there obviously has to be some bit of customer need. So talking to customers and really understanding their wants and desires for digital and these new solutions and services, and then creating a presentation or an opportunity assessment or whatever that you can then take to leadership to get that initial buy-in. Because before you create a team and before you decide to go off and actually pursue the opportunity, that leadership kind of buy-in or blessing is very important. But from there, it is really about organizing a group of individuals, whether that be separate outside the BUs, from the BUs, or within a BU, to actually go and address these opportunities.
Excellent. We also have this question. What is the biggest mistake you see OEMs doing right now as they try to adapt to IoT and smart system? Is it not partnering? Is it fearing competition? Is it something else?
Biggest kind of fault, I think, when we talk to OEMs, it was this idea that people were not embracing their role in the ecosystem. And so understanding how customers will actually be leveraging these solutions in the future and trying to drive new value with an ecosystem of partners. That's one. Two, I think this idea of a technology first approach. So if I just go develop the technology, if I build it, they will come. So many people have gone off and had conversations with Microsofts and Amazons and Google Cloud platforms of the world and said, I'm going to go be digital. But they haven't really stopped and said, like, how is this going to help my, customers? And so really stopping and addressing those customer needs and pain points is another area. And then the third, I think, is, to your point, sort of not acting. And so I think this is going away very quickly because companies are forced to act now because their peers and competitors are acting. But those who are not acting will face problems and challenges and kind of be behind the eight ball.
All right. To just go a little bit further, there's another question about partnerships. Someone is asking, how do you approach a potential partnership with someone that you may perceive as a competitor, like the strange bedfellow idea that you had?
Yeah, and I think this is a touchy one because depending on the industry you're in and the IP at stake, I mean, there's a certain boundary for how far someone can go. But I would say that, if I think about sort of, the example of, different peers partnering together, and potential customers or potential competitors, I would say it's using the customer as sort of the vehicle to do so. So ensuring if two peers or competitors are in a situation where they're potentially kind of next to each other in an opportunity, and what I would be doing is I would be leveraging the customer, whether it's through workshops, whether it's through LOIs to create value, for example, whatever those opportunities are, how do I actually work with the customer to address these problems? Because if both the peers and competitors are going to receive an added value or an added revenue stream as a result of this, to us, then it will kind of be more catalytic than if they're just worried about the competitor without actually talking to the customer first.
All right, I got another one here that's really interesting. What's the best strategy to digitize or implement smart system for smaller OEMs, smaller companies, small startups who can't afford or don't seem to have the budget to go in that direction?
Great question. For definitely the smaller OEMs, for those companies that are less than 50 people, for example, in our opinion, it's to start small. So start with a pilot of a technology and use startups or vendors who are smaller in the space because they're going to be more likely to want to work with you because they're looking for customers to prove their technologies as well. So if I'm a small OEM, I'm going to go find a couple of startups who are willing to kind of share the cost of a few pilots to see if I can actually obtain value. And then from there, it will be a calculated risk because I've proven out the value of the solutions. And now I'm not just trying to overhaul my company because, as you said, I mean, there isn't budget to do that. And so working with the smaller companies will allow for, that more flexibility and more approachability than you might if you were working with bigger companies.
Okay, there's another one here. With smart systems, will the existing SCADA, the PLCs, will they be replaced as part of the digital transformation?
It's a good question. So the question is, will SCADA, so supervisory control and data acquisition and PLCs be replaced? And the answer is no. In our opinion, those types of control systems will exist. Just how you kind of layer these applications kind of to sit mutually exclusively above those control equipment. So the drives, the motors, the PLCs, like all of that equipment is still going to be needed. We believe just over time, you will see the data from those control networks being used much more open and freely to create new value and new efficiencies within operations. But that is a good question. And, I think there's a lot of companies seeing the software implications and the impacts on PLCs. And over time, there may be some of those replace, but I would say that over time, I think they will always exist in one form or another.
All right, maybe a final question here. So once we move from in the direction of digitization, here, where is it? There it is. So if we have a concept, something like the physical internet, how does it kind of work with OEM? So we have someone here asking about the hyper-connected web of supplier, and with connectivity and sensors, what's the direction that other kinds of businesses, not necessarily just OEMs, are going to take in the future?
So the question is sort of how will people embrace the internet to drive new value?
Yeah, and what other kind of opportunities exist, not just necessarily for OEMs, but with Internet of Things, what other synergies can be accomplished?
Yeah, again, I think this goes back to the idea that you don't know what you don't know. And so a lot of what we're focused on today are simple applications, and that over time, you'll start to see more compound and complex applications. So take like a smart city, for example. If I think about human and health services or citizen services that are not connected to one single device, for example, how all of these ecosystems of data will be kind of compounded or, to create these complex applications will create new value. And so I think it's not just about, can I create efficiency in the device? Like, yes, that's very important and within systems, but to the point or the question, where are we going to see new values? And I think it's really in new revenue streams and new services from data, and that's smart enabled services. So this isn't just equipment, but it's like I was talking about. It's the kind of services that will be enabled as a result, or that will come from these different opportunities, because all of these ecosystems across the economy will essentially compound in a way that will create a fluidity across data that we don't know what those new services will be yet today, because we haven't gotten there, but they will come. I mean, if I look at data exchange platforms, for example, there's a company called Autonomo. They're creating a data exchange platform for vehicles to then use all of that data across cities. 5 years ago, that wasn't even thought of as kind of a way to do this. And so there will be future services and future value added, and we see a lot of that coming in the near future.
Well, thank you so much, Alex. As we approach here the end of the hour, I'll think we'll just wrap it up. I want to thank you, Alex, one more time. Much appreciated. And to everyone on the session, if you have any question, please reach out to Alex direct. He's an expert on OEMs, IoT, and smart systems. And of course, if you're interested in any more information about interfacing, please reach out direct. And feel free to download our handout material that we've made available for you. There will also be a short form to fill out after the sessions, and we appreciate your feedback. We bring in all these experts in their field, and we want to continuously improve in terms of webinar quality and topics and format. So we want to hear from you. So thank you, Alex, one more time, and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Tony, and thanks, everyone. Have a good day.